what makes a great story? There are so many different screenwriting books out there telling you how to, that they have cracked the formula for writing and how to tell a story in the best way. And they can't all be right because that kind of would make the others wrong, right? And there's a book called Into the Woods, which tries to kind of formulate this consensus between them. And ultimately, it goes back to the one thing that's true among storytelling across cultures, across centuries, is the basic narrative arc. And one of the things that I always have to remind people, students, other writers when I'm talking to them, and remind myself as well, is that the narrative arc is a graph, kind of like a mathematical graph. And most people realize, okay, well, it's this arc and over time, right? So time is one of the measurements that we are evaluating story. But what is this vertical graph? What makes that arc? Why is it arcing? What is happening there? And a lot of people will say, oh, well, it's character over time, like character change or plot or action points. But that's really not what the basic narrative arc is. The basic narrative arc is about intensity. That's all it is. It's not, here's the best way to take the character from their normal world to the supernatural world, or how to save the cat, or 3-act structure, 5-act structure, 7 sequences, all the different things that are ways to kind of crack the the screenwriting goalposts that you need to get to. It's just about feeling. Intensity is a feeling, and that intensity isn't the intensity in the character. It's the intensity that the audience is feeling watching this character go through whatever it is that they're going through. And so there are certain things that are needed to create intensity. Conflict is one of them. But that is really, it's just very simple in that sense, which can be frustrating when you're trying to write your screenplay or fix your screenplay or figure out what's the best way, best combination of characters, or what should happen now. And that is where I really love Walter Murch's book on editing, In the Blink of an Eye. It's a very short book, but he has this 6 rules for the ideal cut. And he gives them percentages for kind of how to evaluate it. And the top percentage of why you make a cut as you're editing your timeline together is emotion. And he gives that 51%. And it's not scientifically driven. There's no data related to his it's a bit tongue in cheek, but it's just a reminder that it is all about emotion. Movies, storytelling, it's all about guiding the emotion of your audience on this ride. And so I always appreciate that because, editing is where you finally tell the final version of the story that started in the script, but they are both guided by the same principles. It's about intensity, it's about emotion, it's about taking people on this ride. And that can be a hard thing to figure out. What exactly does that mean? But that really should be your ultimate guiding light is, okay, we've got this character, something is happening to them, and then how do we build that tension? How do we build that emotion and suspense about whether or not they're going to attain their goal? And the graph is really an average. You can start out with an intensity flex, that hook, And Fast and the Furious does this really well. They start out with a heist, with all these cars chasing. You're introduced to all the characters, what they're good at, who's the funny man, who's the tech person, who's the sarcastic, surly person, blah blah blah. And you find out that they're great at racing and all the things, and they have access to all this tech, and they're, you know, anyways. So it starts out with this huge intensity burst, and then it comes down, and they have a barbecue, and they talk about family and why this is important, right? And so the intensity drops, and then they're on to the next heist, and the intensity builds. But it's this kind of up and down wave that, on average, has to go higher and higher and higher. That opening sequence can't be the most intense thing that happens in that movie, because you've got nowhere to go for your climax, right? You've got to go from that kind of baseline starting point somewhere. Otherwise, you've got no story, right? And we've all seen those movies where they start out great, but by the end, you're kind of like, oh, that kind of fell apart, Whereas there's a lot more leniency if a movie kind of starts out a little rocky, but then that ride really comes together and ends in this amazing way, and you're just blown away by the end of it. That's a much more satisfying experience from an audience and a much more successful film. So, not exactly a constructive, concrete tip of like how to apply this, but something to just remind yourself is that you always have to build intensity. And there's one writing group that talks about the way to approach it is that you say, because this happens, then this happens, not just what's next, but you're building on what has already happened. So, it's a game of one-upsmanship. They tried this one thing, what's the next big thing? And this applies across genre. It doesn't have to be Fast and the Furious. It can be a quiet drama, but it needs to go somewhere. Otherwise, why are we telling this story? Why are we taking people on this ride? It has to grip people and take them somewhere so that we have that feeling by the end. Because that's what Walter Murch says in his book, is that at the end of the day, people don't really remember the plot or the characters exactly. They don't necessarily remember shots or the score or, anything. I mean, they, of course, will remember some of it, but not all of it and not exactly. It's the feeling that we walk away with. And that feeling stays with us forever with those, our favorite movies. But if you had to describe your favorite movie from when you were 10 right now, you can still remember the feeling, but you'll probably screw up the story and the details of it. So it's a really interesting kind of contradiction. So just something to keep in mind.